Hey, leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are passionate about helping you reach your maximum potential and to amplify your leadership impact. I'm your host, Doug Smith, and we recorded this episode live from the Burgo Realty Studios. Today, I'm excited to share my conversation with Dr. Robert Marbut. Dr. Marbut has served as the Executive Director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness from 2019 to 2021 after being appointed by President Donald Trump. He's also made recently significant contributions to two powerful documentaries, one of which is called No Address, which explores America's homelessness crisis, and he also made a documentary on fentanyl called Fentanyl, Death Incorporated, examining the devastating fentanyl epidemic. And in our conversation, Dr. Marbut's going to provide profound insights on the root causes of America's homelessness crisis and actionable solutions that we can implement to be part of the solution. He also shares the alarming spread of the fentanyl epidemic and effective strategies for combating that as well. As many of you know, these are two of the most pressing challenges that face our nation today, and understanding them is absolutely crucial for meaningful change. So I hope this discussion will open your eyes to see how you can become a part of the solution. So with that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Dr. Robert Marbut. Hey, Dr. Marbut, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. I've known you for quite a few years now through my work at our rescue mission here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And from the moment I first got introduced to you and just heard about the work that you're doing and how you talk about the homeless crisis in America, I've wanted to do this interview. So I'm very excited about this conversation and the light that you're going to bring to everyone who will listen to it. So welcome.
And thank you for having me. And more importantly, thank you for caring about the sort of homelessness crisis and the substance use, fentanyl, mental health crisis. They're all commingled. So thank you for caring about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people care about it, but they just don't have answers. And so I'm hoping that you can shed light on a lot of things today. And when we first met, I want to start with a great story of how you even got involved from a political standpoint. I don't want to ruin it. I'll let you tell the story, but you got a call from the White House one day that led to a quite an interesting journey for you. Can you share that story?
Well, I was a White House fellow a long time ago with President Bush, and had done a lot early on and worked for different presidents, sometimes, paid, sometimes sort of as for a free consultant help on it. And I really had not been that involved, especially in back in the Obama time. And President Trump got elected, and I was still doing my local and regional and national consulting. And I literally got a call. I'm making a smoked turkey. I'm a Texan, so we're doing a 24-hour smoked turkey, backyard, have the whole family coming over. And it's 3:30 in the afternoon, and I literally get a call, and it says, President Trump and his team wants you up here on Monday. And I'm like, it's Wednesday of Thanksgiving weekend. And they're like, we want you here on Monday. And I'm like, I'm making my turkey. So,
oh, man,
and literally I got up there on Monday, and it just, then within a couple of days, I was confirmed as the technical term is Executive Director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And President Reagan was the first to start calling it the homelessness czar back when he got it started way back when.
And so what was your charge like when you got put in that position? What were you charged with?
I was charged of all things homelessness, and it's a really unusual job in the federal government in that you're basically picked by the president, and then you're confirmed by a bunch of other confirmed cabinet officials and sub-officials. But what's strange is you also are the principal advisor on homelessness to the head of the Senate, the head of the House, so the Speaker of the House, Senate Pro Tem, the leadership, other leadership in the Senate, and the committees if they want you to, and sometimes people take your advice, sometimes they don't take your advice. So you work for, you're like a principal policy advisor for the executive branch and the legislative branch, which is sort of an unusual job in the federal government.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were able to make a difference in the role?
We've started to, but to be honest, within a few weeks of me being on station, we had the crisis of COVID that just hit. And so everything I was doing on homelessness, everything I was doing on fentanyl just sort of got put on pause while we started working on COVID. And then And as you may remember, on March 13th, all the federal employees were sent home. And so I lost my staff. And so I did something really strange because I started traveling around the country during COVID. And so I was hitting 2 cities a day during COVID throughout the entire COVID crisis.
Yeah. So, and I know at some point throughout your journey in the political world, you felt like you could make a bigger impact if you started pursuing media, which is what you're doing now. And I certainly want to cover all things homelessness, but I want to give people kind of context for what has set you up for what you're doing today. Can you talk about that transition and why you thought you could make a much bigger impact through media?
And there was one very specific incident that happened, and when this happened, I said, I have to do a fentanyl documentary. And I'm not saying government's not important and you need to have people in government. And if I got asked, I would go back into government. But I started to realize you could write all the white papers you want, and sometimes you can't get things moved. And there was a very specific incident. We were talking about fentanyl. I was speaking with a U.S. senator, I consider a friend or a good acquaintance, smart guy, really good at it. And, so I don't even want to embarrass him. And I mentioned something about fentanyl and homelessness. And he says, well, fentanyl is just an extension of meth. Well, meth is hyperactive. It's like, in the old terms, an upper. Fentanyl is really a downer. It actually paralyzes your chest cavity. So it stops your heart from beating. It stops your lungs from breathing. And that's how you die. And so the drugs are almost complete opposite. And here's a person on the committee who should know what's going on, who I had presented, I can't tell you how many white papers, single page one-sheeters. I had sent so much information into his office, and I saw he had some of them in front of him, but still he wasn't aware that they're just chemically totally opposite sides of the spectrum, like not even close. And that was when I realized you can write all the white papers you want, and sometimes it just won't move the needle. And I've already seen with our fentanyl movie what's happened with the president, and because everybody totally understood the Mexico side with the cartels. That was understood. And the name of the documentary is Fentanyl Death Incorporated. But we spend an equal amount of time talking about what's happening in Canada and how much fentanyl is coming across the Canadian border. And a lot of people forget that the U.S. and Canada have the longest border of any 2 contiguous countries in the world. And most people are not aware of it. And it's not just Maine to Blaine, it's the frontier of Alaska and the Western territories of Canada. And that was when I started to realize you could write all the white papers you can, and sometimes it doesn't move the needle. But when we put out the fentanyl movie, within 3 days of circulation of the fentanyl movie, suddenly the White House and President-elect and other folks are talking about what's going on the Canadian border and treating the problem on the Canadian border equal to the problem we have in Mexico. And that's the power of documentaries. And if you look at theatrical movies, the power of storytelling. And it really makes a difference.
At Indosha, we help transform visions into results. What does that mean? We often work with companies who are doing amazing things that have incredible products and services, but fail to communicate what they do properly and market themselves effectively. We passionately serve entrepreneurs, business leaders, and visionaries to see what's in their heart and their visions for the future come to life. We do that by providing fractional marketing leadership and creative execution all in one. That's what we call VCMO. With VCMO, you get a marketing director and a team of creative professionals to help execute all of your marketing needs, all for one monthly cost. How do we do all this? We do it 3 ways. Number 1, we get your vision. We get excited about your mission and your trajectory as a company and come alongside to see you go further, faster. 2, we have a team of talented strategists and creatives to get all of the work done. And 3, we flat out work freaking hard for you and your company. Reach out today. Let's start a conversation.
Yeah, and so you created this documentary on fentanyl. You also created one called No Address, which addresses the homelessness crisis we have in America. And I guess I want to focus on both of those. And just because you're talking about fentanyl, let's just start there. With fentanyl and the drug just crisis that we have in America, I think in 2022 we broke a record of over 100,000 overdose deaths. I don't know if I shared with you my personal story. I have a younger sister who was a heroin addict. We lost her to an overdose in 2019, likely because of fentanyl. How did we get here, and what can we do about that?
Well, first, let's talk about the magnitude and put the magnitude of the fentanyl crisis, and then we'll do a quick how we got here. But the number, to me, that frames the existential threat to America. I've made it several comments, and I've compared fentanyl to Tojo and Hitler and Mussolini, who are just were horrible actors, horrible people. But in terms of American deaths, think about this number. More people have died in the last 5 years of fentanyl in the United States than all American men and women, all 7 uniformed branches of service, intelligence services, for the last 100 years. So if you go back to World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, global war on terror, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, Kosovo, a few other smaller UN actions, take all those deaths of Americans, fentanyl still killed more people than all that. And that's combat deaths, and in theater deaths, which is sort of the expanded definition of KIA, killed in action in theater. And when you start to think about how that number, then everybody doesn't believe me when I say it. Every time I say it, phones pop out and you can tell people start tabulating it, and you go, that is just an amazing number. 100 years of deaths of Americans at war do not equal the death total of fentanyl the last 5 years in America. Now, how did we get here? Phase 1 of fentanyl, and we're now on sort of phase 3, but the start of the fentanyl crisis and why it happened so fast was, we all are very aware of the Purdue Pharma, which was the sort of jump from organic opioids to synthetic opioids in the 20-aughts and then in the 20-teens. And we got so many people addicted, probably hundreds of thousands of people addicted on synthetic opioids. And you had millions of prescriptions of synthetic opioids, mostly post-surgical is where most of it came from. And we all know the story. The doctors were saying this is different than organic. It's not addictive, and you can take it and don't have to worry. And it turns out not only was it not addictive, it was actually more addictive than even the organics were. And it was a complete lie. We all know that story and such. So when all those lawsuits happened, suddenly the spigot of synthetic opioids just goes from overflowing to almost non-existent. And doctors weren't giving it, pharmacies weren't giving it, hospitals weren't allowing it, et cetera. And this is where China and the Mexican cartels jumped in. I mean, they're horrible actors, but they're incredible business and entrepreneurial. And they knew we could backfill this addiction and all these prescriptions, and we're going to backfill it and bring in the fentanyl from China via the cartels of Mexico, who already had great distribution networks in the United States. They knew how to get it across the border. They had been doing illicit drugs for a long time. They've been doing all sorts of forms of sex trafficking, human trafficking, coyote services. So they knew exactly how to backfill it. And that's why it goes so fast, is they just dumped it in the market. Now it's evolved, and now we have Canada involved. India's out there doing a little bit. You now have people in the United States starting to make it inside the United States. But to fully understand the power and potency of fentanyl, no drug has ever been made this potent in the world's history, and 1 grain of rice will kill 15 people.
Jeez. That's crazy. Yeah, I know. It was interesting when my sister was using. I remember seeing an article in the paper one weekend here in Pittsburgh, and there was like 22 deaths within a day or two. And I wanted to reach out to my sister and say, like, please be careful. And I reached out to our program director, and she's like, don't do that. She's like, when addicts see things like that, they're actually more attracted to it because they think it's going to give them a better high, and nobody thinks what will happen to them. And clearly, I mean, like you just mentioned the numbers, and
I'm sorry about your sister.
Thank you.
I sadly hear this story every day, sometimes multiple times a day.
Right.
But this is real people. These are real human beings. These are not numbers. These are not stats or big aggregated. And when you start to aggregate data, you lose the people involved. You lose the personalities. You lose your brother, your sister, your mom, your sister, cousin, etc. I'm so sorry to hear that.
I appreciate that. And I think for me and probably, millions of other people, it's like, well, what can we actually do? I jokingly always think of Liam Neeson in the movie Taken of let's just go assassinate everybody who has a part in this, but that's not realistic either. What can we do, or what can the country do to put an end to this, or at least slow it down?
Well, sadly, the fentanyl crisis has gotten so out of control, and it went so fast. Part of it starts with Purdue Pharma, and then candidly, the last 4 years, not much was done. I think some people in the White House, they were slow to react to all sorts of crises. Some did, but most of the people, the White House as a whole, was slow to react to almost every crisis that came down the pike. And the other was, it's very hard to talk about fentanyl without talking about the border. They go hand in hand. And a lot of people politically didn't want to talk about the border, so they didn't talk about fentanyl. And then it just it metastasized and expanded. And now we're in an existential threat. It's amazing. More people died last year of fentanyl than Korea and Vietnam put together. What's that? 17, 18 years of war that many of your listeners are very aware of. Many were alive during that period. And what do we do about it? And I'm going to really oversimplify this, but there are 5 things we need to do about it. We need to really get serious with China on their precursors and now pre-precursors, that they bring the active ingredient, if you will, to fentanyl. They're no longer making it their, pills. They actually send the active ingredient into China and into Mexico. Second, we have to work on the cartels of Mexico. And we need to do it a lot like the model we did with Colombia. We were very, very successful in the cocaine wars with doing joint operations in country in Colombia. And we need to do that type of operation in Mexico. Canada, a little different, but it's still a border problem. We got to close up the Canadian border side. We have to work with the Canadian. And in their case, they have some very liberal policies about drug use in Canada that's bleeding into the United States. Fourth, we need to recriminalize and prosecute high-end, meaning high volume or high potency type of drugs. Many states had legalized fentanyl, basically. Legalized California, Oregon, Washington State, many cities. Some actually changed the statutes and said, we're no longer going to prosecute these. In other places like Chicago and Philadelphia for a period of time, it was on the books as illegal, but nobody would prosecute it. And so whether it's the taking it off the books or the failure to prosecute, it sends a signal to children in particular that, look, hey, mom, dad, it's not illegal. Alcohol and cigarettes were more controlled than fentanyl in most of America. So it sends the wrong message. And then fifth, we really need to have family conversations around the kitchen table, around the dinner table, put our cell phones down and have meaningful conversations and reconnect, where parents are paying attention to their children, where they're looking and seeing the signs. It has their behavior change. And when in terms of fentanyl, are they more sleepy? Are they more lethargic? And there's, our movie goes through and helps people understand what it looks like to be under fentanyl, because fentanyl is a unique, when somebody's on fentanyl, they act so different than any other drug overdose. And so you can sort of see where it comes. So those are your 5: China, Mexico, Canada, inside of our state policies and then our families.
Yeah, so going back to making it different politically, those first three pretty much are we need the right people in leadership in office that can actually execute quickly and do things. And the last two are really up to us. I think that's so interesting. I'm interested on the gateway drug things, like you mentioned, like marijuana and alcohol. We had a client who's now a member of our staff at Light of Life, our rescue mission here in our city. And I remember him telling me, and I sold drugs in high school. So like, if it were, aside from the grace of God, I'm much more likely to be a client at our rescue mission than be someone working there.
Or you wouldn't be alive now.
Or I wouldn't be. Same fate as my sister. We were going down the exact same path. My mom died. My life turned around for Christ. My sister kept going down the same path. But my friend always said, and he went through our program, he said, when you're in 8th grade and, you tried drugs for the first time or drink for the first time, you don't know, but you're actually playing Russian roulette. And 4 out of the 5 people that you might be trying it with may end up okay, but one of you is going to end up, addicted to heroin, et cetera, an alcoholic, become homeless, et cetera. I'm just curious, I'm a parent of 5 kids now. They're all under 8. What advice do you have for parents, just, I guess, of young people that we can actually make a difference here on the front end of this?
Well, we got to have honest conversations. You got to be paying attention. You got to know what's going on in your kiddo's life, and you got to intervene. And this idea that I'll let them find their own way. I have not met a single person who started fentanyl who was alive 18 months later. Fentanyl has sped up the overdose addiction / death cycle so fast. And you got to intervene immediately if it's fentanyl. It's not like coke or crack or some of these other, K2 spice, black tar, where you have 4 or 5 years to intervene. The person will be dead. And so you have to intervene very, very quickly now if fentanyl's involved. And we have to understand this is a game changer. And it's not just the gateway, because the gateway is most of the research now, it's not definitive yet, but most of the research says, back to your example of 5, that 1 in 5 has a genetic predisposition to, with their genes to become addictive once exposed, and then the other group is not. So you have the gateway problem, and that's a serious problem. The other now is DEA, all their current estimates, and they randomly sample all the time. They're checking stuff on the street. If you take all the other illicit drugs, not synthetic opioid and fentanyl, take all the other drugs, K2, spice, weed, coke, meth, etc. Right now, they're estimating about 70% of all other illicit drugs are now tainted with fentanyl. Jeez. And up in your area in Philadelphia, they actually market it as a laced drug. It's called Trink on the street in Philadelphia. That was sort of the epicenter of the Trink crisis. And that is 30% horse tranquilizer, which should be, let's stop and think, a horse tranquilizer. For an animal 8, 9, 10 times our weight, we're going to put 30% of that in, which is a tranquilizer for horse. And then you add 70% fentanyl, which is the strongest, most potent drug ever created on planet Earth. And you put them together in a mix. And that's you're in an area right where the epicenter of that started. And so you got the gateway problem, you got the lacing where they purposely put it in, and then you have the contamination problem. And this is probably killing the most people now, where on Thursday night, the bad guys and bad gals make a batch of fentanyl on a countertop or whatever. They're not doing this in scientific labs and white glove. So they have fentanyl dust on top of the counter. And then the next night, they're making weed or they're making coke or they're making meth, and it's all tainted. And fentanyl dust will kill 2 to 3 grains of salt will kill anybody of fentanyl. It's so microscopic, you can't smell it, you largely can't see it, can't taste it. And so that's why you see so many people do what's called one and done, where you get one drug, you take one hit, whatever, and you got the bad part of it, and you're done.
Jeez. That's wild. I heard you say this was more in context of homelessness, but I think it applies here too on how to get this right. You said if your city is making it easier to get high and harder to get treatment, you're heading the wrong direction. And basically, you're just going to have a huge crisis. Whereas if your city is making it harder to get high and easier to get treatment, you're heading the right direction. Has that overall been what you've seen from a leadership perspective, city to city?
That's almost my mantra or moniker or whatever. And I really firmly believe that should be our policy North Star. In America, if you look at the places that are real bad in homelessness numbers and the double and tripling every 3 or 4 years, if you look at the death rates on the street, all those cities are currently making it very easy to get high and hard to get treatment. And we need to flip that on this head and make it easy to get treatment and hard to get high. That should be our policy. That should be our implementation. That should be what parents do, that what teachers do, coaches do, friends do. And I can't tell you how many sad that I go to so many websites, just I hear about a website, go look at it, and they call it harm reduction. And you can't make the drug supply of fentanyl safe. You can't make taking fentanyl safe, but a lot of people are trying to do it under the guise of this crazy theory called harm reduction. And if you go most of your websites, most of them now say, don't you and your buddy, so if we went out and did fentanyl together, make sure one of you is not doing fentanyl while the other one's doing it. So when they pass out and technically die, their heart stops, they don't breathe, then you can call 911 or try to do some intervention. That's their answer. The answer should be, we shouldn't be doing fentanyl.
Yeah.
That's
Does
the
Narcan
answer, not let's do it with the buddy.
Will Narcan work on someone who's ODing on fentanyl?
So that's a great question. And Narcan's a tool, and it's a very powerful tool used in the right ways. But let's understand that Narcan is not the answer to the fentanyl crisis. It's a tool in the toolbox, but it is not the answer. Here's why. We all know people have had heart attacks and stroke who don't breathe for 2, 3, 4 minutes. You know, oxygen, the heart stops, the breathing stops, the lungs stop, and the heart stop. And when that happens, the cardiologist's first number one concern is how much oxygen was deprived from the brain for how long. And you may have the body back, but you may be brain dead. And what Narcan does, it takes somebody whose heart stopped and lungs stopped, just like a heart attack, just like a stroke, and then you hit them, and then you bring them back. And so I'm starting to see people on the street who've had 10, 15, 20, and even saw somebody the other day had, we think, 37 hits of Narcan, and their brain was just mush. I mean, their body was alive, that, you know, they're barely walking, but their brain wasn't there. There was so much brain damage. And so I think we need to, and again, it's Narcan's a tool, but if we sort of said it's a magic elixir, it doesn't fix addiction. It doesn't fix the crisis. It will, for that one person on the ground, bring them back to life. But even then, by the way, Billy Baldwin and I were out in Spokane, Washington a couple months ago. We were doing a joint presentation, and when he and I go out, he's the narrator on both of our movies. We always go out in every city we go to, we always go out on the street with no cameras, just us, or a rescue mission or a Salvation Army or a local outreach. We saw a guy go down, literally pull right up on him. They hit him with an injection of Narcan, didn't work. They hit him with the nose, and then they hit him with another one. And only after 3 attempts over a 1-minute period did he come back. So they think he probably had no oxygen to the brain for about 3 minutes. And when he woke up, we didn't know him. We didn't know the man before, but all I know is what he looked like after, and it looked like serious brain damage. And so I can't tell because we don't have the before and after. Yeah. But I think we need to if there are a lot of people on the street, I hear, well, I'm carrying my Narcan, so I'm going to be okay. That's just not true.
Yeah, that's why I brought that up. I mean, that was my sister. So she would always have Narcan on her and say, oh, well, until you're fine until you're not, right? It only takes one time, to your point. I want to go back to policy too, also about the cities. So cities that are making it easier to get high. I'm curious, right? Like, what is their argument for creating policies? You mentioned harm reduction. Like, clearly they're seeing a crisis result from the policies they've created. But like, what do you think their argument is for the policies that they put in place to create what they've created?
Well, I think, and it comes from a distinct group on the far left. And I really try hard not to make things right, left, Republican,
Sure.
and Democrat. To me, this is red, white, and blue. This is human. This shouldn't be a political issue.
Right.
But from the very far wokey left, and ironically, it's almost like a far right libertarian thing. It's like you have the right to do with your body with what you want to do with it. And it's sort of like you can do whatever you want. And so it's this extreme view that not only are we going to let you get high and do fentanyl, we, like in San Francisco, and we have this in our movie on Americans with No Address and our documentary on homelessness, we show the city of San Francisco, the city and county together, health authority spending roughly $28 million to set up a safe consumption site where you can come take fentanyl. And they paid for all the cost of everything. And you bring your fentanyl in, you come and you get high there. And then when you pass out and you technically legally die, then they bring the Narcan in and they reverse it. And I'm like, why in the world would we do that? Why not spend $28 million on treatment and recovery programs and help programs like the Rescue Mission, the City Gate, Salvation Army, Harbor Light? There are a lot of good programs out there. Why not give them $28 million rather than saying, come get high here and we'll fund it? I can't believe taxpayers' dollars were funding safe consumption. And it was a decriminalized state. And the DA, when you ever hit the threshold of actually a criminal level, the DA wasn't prosecuting it. And I will say, here's the cool thing. I have had so many Democrat mayors call me up and say, tell me, don't mention my name, please. And they all start with, so-and-so told me to call you, but you can't use my name. And I always laugh. And I've had now probably 60 Democrat mayors call me over the last few years. And they go, what's going on? How do we do it? Because what we're doing, harm reduction is not working. Housing first is not working. It helped me understand it. And there's sincere conversations from mega big cities to small cities. And the cool things are they're small city, liberalish cities, Democrat mayors, some are independent mayors who are starting to say, this is not working. We tried that for 10 years and it got worse, not better. It was supposed to end. Instead, it got worse. So they're starting to really get a lot more honest. The great thing about most mayors and most city managers, they're problem solvers. They're less ideological than going up the political food chain. So they're starting to look at it. But to me, the most exciting, positive thing, and most people miss this because it was the same day as the presidential election. California legislature had taken a series of legislative actions signed by their governors to decriminalize high-end drug use and potency of drugs. They've just been, at every chance they decriminalized, every chance they didn't prosecute, they were going through. The citizens of California rose up, and again, it got lost because of the presidential election. They voted almost 2-1 to overturn their legislature and recriminalize drug use.
Wow.
High end. And these are not Midwest. This is not the Southeast. This is California, just average citizens looking out their window of their car, their house, their businesses and going, and by the way, not being able to go back into parks anymore because the parks would just become drug centers, and said, this isn't working. We're going we're going to roll back and we're going to start recriminalizing drugs and such. And I get some people want to talk about low-end drugs. That's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about fentanyl, meth, coke, black tar, K2, spice. There's nothing about that should be legal. And I can't tell you how many children I know in families who tell their parents, well, if it's so bad, why did the governor decriminalize it? And or they'll throw back to their parents, well, smoking is worse than you, alcohol is worse than you, because those are legal in states. I mean, in San Francisco, you can get up to an $8,000 fine for smoking a cigarette outside of a building. Not your first, that's if you're multi-user. And in San Francisco, they'll actually help you do fentanyl. They'll help pay for all the paraphernalia to do fentanyl with you, but then they give you a $280 ticket for first offense smoking outside of a building. I'm like,
it's crazy. That's a lot. We've talked a lot about fentanyl and the drug crisis. I want to talk about homelessness as well. And we were talking before, you almost can't mention one without the other, but I think homelessness is a crisis almost in every major city in America, which is why you made the documentary and the movie No Address. But I think a lot of people are just like, how did we get here? And drugs certainly have a part to play in that, but I think homelessness is a lot more complicated than just saying it's only because of the drug crisis. So, how did we get to where we are with the homeless crisis?
Well, and it's important to understand, and I'm going to get a little wonky here, so sorry about it, but Housing and Urban Development, HUD, has 5 definitions of homelessness. Department of Education, who deals with children homeless, has 5 definitions. So there are 10 federal definitions of homelessness. 2 out of those 10 are what we would call street level homeless, that 2 out of the HUD. And these are the sort of the homeless that most people see, most people talk about. The rescue mission, Salvation Army, this is where they spend most of their time, not all their time, but most of their time. This is what the media covers and such. These are the 600,000 adult males and females out on the street, maybe going in and out of a shelter, but out on the street, literally living on the street. And for that group, the largest study ever conducted, and by the way, not a right-wing think tank, not a center think tank, but UCLA and Cal Berkeley have a joint research group, armed policy group called the California Policy Lab. They did the biggest study of homelessness in America. And what they found was 3/4 of the people in street-level homelessness have untreated mental illness. And they self-medicate, hence the high-end drug, and almost 3/4 have a substance use disorder. And that didn't surprise me at all. I mean, if you're on the street, you just go out, come walk with me, and you'll see this is not about affordable housing. This is not about all these other crazy ideas that come up. This is purely untreated mental illness with self-medication, and then you become an addict of very high-end, dangerous drugs. That's what 3/4 of it is. The thing that surprised me out of their policy study was half of the people that they researched said it was the substance abuse and the untreated mental illness why they lost their housing. So this is the largest study ever conducted, and they said self-report says 50%. And we all know, anybody who works in the clinical world knows self-report always underestimates that number. So if they're saying half, and we know from their charts and their criminal backgrounds and their other ways to find it, that somewhere between 50 and 75% are experiencing major level of substance use disorder combined with mental health. So then you ask, how did we get there? In 1950, there were about 500,000 government-funded mental health beds in America, federal government, state government, local government. That number now is 30,000. And it's actually a little less than 30,000. And almost all of those beds are what are called forensic beds, which means they're there because when somebody like think Hinckley, who shot President Reagan and almost killed several other people, he was found innocent by reason of insanity, but he wasn't let go. He was put in a mental health place. And so a lot of people have this misunderstanding that if you're, quote, found innocent, you let go. That's not the way it works in most states for most crimes. You don't go to prison, but you go to a mental health facility run by the state, and that's called a forensic bed. So almost all that 30,000, and it's less than 30, it's a little less than 30 now, is all for forensic beds. So there's no proactive mental health, behavioral health beds combined with substance use treatment that's funded anywhere. And there's sort of blame to go around. The one side was watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, thought it was a documentary, and said we need to deinstitutionalize because this one place in New York was bad. And it was bad. And it should have been closed, but not the entire system. Then you had people on the other side of the spectrum saying government taxpayer dollars shouldn't be paying for mental health and behavioral health. So let's stop the funding. We shouldn't be funding it. And so you had the two extremes, one saying we're not going to fund it, and the other said we don't want to use it for civil rights reasons, civil liberty reasons. And that's how you go from 500,000 to 30. By the way, how much bigger is our country than we were in 1950? And so 500,000 beds to 30,000 doesn't even take into account how much higher population we have. So where did everybody go? The streets, the jails, and emergency rooms.
Wow. So I guess to simplify back to how you did with fentanyl, you had 5 steps. What can cities do? What can individuals do? What can government do to really put a dent in this issue?
I think the money used on any housing voucher should be 100% tied to treatment. It's that simple. After 2013, we just started giving away vouchers and we no longer required treatment. And programs like yours need to be able to allow to have requirements for treatment. So if you come into the facility, you want to have a treatment requirement, you got to work a program. You got to do 40 hours in treatment and such. And we know from Johns Hopkins, that probably one of the best research institutions in the world on substance abuse, mental health, et cetera, they have found if you don't take at least 12 hours of very formal behavioral health, mental health, and substance abuse disorder treatment a week, you are not going to be able to compete with addiction and untreated mental illness. And I got to take a break. Let me plug in here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just give me the warning here. I don't want to, and I might, if you don't mind, I could go back to that real quick and tighten that if you want it.
Yeah, it's great.
So,
you ready?
Yeah, there we go. So what we know from great research of Johns Hopkins, which is probably the best on untreated mental illness, substance abuse, substance disorder, behavioral health, they found that you need 12 hours of treatment each week in order to, that's the base number, minimal number to start successfully dealing with the untreated mental illness and with the substance abuse. And if you don't have 12 hours, you're not going to be able to compete with substance abuse. So if we're going to give you a housing voucher, we should have not just a requirement that you work a program, but we also fund it. So let's think about other federal programs. Pell Grant for college students getting paid for college. TANF, general welfare for families with children, unemployment insurance. All 3 of those, when you receive the government money in trade, you have to do something. Think about a Pell Grant, which it says you have to attend class. Most states requires 88.5% attendance. You got to go to class. You have to have a GPA of 2.0 if you want to keep getting your money, and you have to finish in a certain period of time. Well, we give away a housing voucher and say, good luck to you, hope it works out with you. And why not, if we give away the voucher, why not also require mental health treatment, substance abuse, if that's what's needed for that person? Not everybody needs the same thing. Some people might be ready for job training and employment services and be able to go straight into that. Other people might need to deal with the substance abuse first before they go into job training. Some may need job retention programs, so they can get a job, they can get the resume done. But how do you make an 8-hour shift? How do you make sure they come back tomorrow, come back on time, come back clean and sober, so that they can keep that job? So everybody needs something unique and special. So let's customize it. And that'd be the third leg of this, is one size does not fit all. We need to customize it. Everybody has a different story on how they got there. So let's customize the treatment to help those individuals as best we can. So one is fund treatment, make treatment and honor treatment, make that the number one goal. Number two, allow for requirements that nonprofits are allowed to require people to do it. And if you don't participate, you don't get the voucher. And then three is let's get really into customization, because everybody needs a different type of treatment and one size doesn't fit all. So if you were to just do those three, get that going, then I would probably start talking. Next thing we need to work on is unemployment and how to get people back into the workforce, both everything from resume writing to job interviewing, to get the job, to the job skill, to job retention.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, I think the Citygate stat I remember that I always cite is that housing first really is only effective for about 25% of people experiencing homelessness. It doesn't work for 75%. And I heard someone at the last conference brought up this whole idea of housing plus, which is basically what you're saying. Hey, housing plus services plus treatment, et cetera. I think that's great. We see a bunch.
You're exactly right, because you do need the voucher. I'm not saying you don't need the voucher. I'm just saying the
100%.
voucher should come with treatment, come together. They're work together. Just like a Pell Grant comes with money to get you to pay for college, but it also has requirements to it. And I hate to sort of soundbite it, but I really believe this, that compassion without accountability is enablement.
Yeah. We see a bunch of examples of cities that are doing it bad: San Francisco, LA, Philadelphia, you've mentioned. What cities have you seen that have kind of gotten this right, or at least on the right track and heading in the right direction? And in addition to things that you may have mentioned, are they doing anything different?
Well, if you want to look at some very large metro areas, San Antonio is very successful after setting up Haven for Hope. They've been in about a 15-year reduction, maintaining about 85% reduction of homelessness since they opened up about 15 years ago. Pinellas County in Florida, which is the western counties of the Tampa metro area, that area has had about a 70% reduction for 12 years and maintained it. And what's so cool about those two, San Antonio and Austin, San Antonio used to have a bigger problem than Austin. Now San Antonio is very manageable, and Austin's one of the worst in the country. They did totally opposite. San Antonio focused on treatment, recovery, and requirement. Austin did just, we're going to give away housing vouchers. Florida, Tampa, West Tampa focused on treatment, recovery, and accountability. East Tampa, where Tampa Bay and Tampa City proper is, on the east side of the bay, they went in on housing first, harm reduction, and they're now doubling and tripling, whereas the west side, in same population, only 5 bridges separate this group. It's probably the most empirically precise sample. But then there are places like Fort Smith, Arkansas, and Winchester, Virginia, that these are very small communities, and they're focusing on treatment and recovery and customization, and they're getting really successful. So you can do it if you can do it in big cities, and can do it in rural, small communities, low population communities, and you can do it anywhere between. But you have to make a commitment to focus on treatment and recovery, not giving away how fast. I mean, this blows me away. And I went to Peter Drucker's graduate school. It wasn't called that. It was called Claremont Graduate School. Now it's called Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker pretty much was the the 20th century number one management guru. And he talked a lot at the end. He wrote 5 or 6 books at the end about what business can teach nonprofits, what nonprofits can teach business. And one of his main messages, what gets measured gets done. And what I've added, the Robert Marbut version of this, what gets measured gets done. And if you measure the wrong thing gets done. Right now,
Wow.
HUD's measurement on homelessness, number one measurement is how many vouchers do you give out? Number 2 measurement is how fast do you get a voucher? So from when you meet your case manager to getting a key, how fast is that? It's not how good was the placement. It wasn't how many people got out of homelessness. It wasn't how many people became self-sufficient. It wasn't how many people got treatment. It was how many more people did you put on welfare and how fast did you get the welfare out? Rather than how many people did we help get out of homelessness, how many people did we help get treatment, and how many people became self-sufficient. And so if we're measuring the wrong thing, we're going to do the wrong thing.
Have they filled that homelessness czar position yet in this administration?
No, and when I went in last time, I went in at the very end of year 3, and it takes I'm not sure there's a true appreciation of how hard it is to fill about 6,000 political appointees and process people and back check people. And you have to, 1,600 of those go through Senate confirmation. So there's a whole process to that. The homelessness czar goes through a different type of confirmation process, approved by about 20 other cabinet and sub-cabinet people. So it takes a while to staff up and fill these up. And I'm so impressed at how fast President Trump's moving. And a lot of people are saying, why is he moving so fast? I mean, most of the complaints I've heard in the last 2 weeks is he's going so fast. And if he doesn't, you don't get around to filling some of these slots out till year 3 or 4. And that's just too late when you're in a crisis.
Yeah. So we've mentioned throughout the documentaries that you've created, but for people listening, where can they find those? Where can they watch them and tune in?
So Americans with No Address documentary, you can see that on Amazon now. Just type, go on to Amazon Prime and just type it in, Americans with No Address, and it pops up. It's an 1.5-hour documentary. It gives you not just how did we get here and what the problems are. We also give 7 examples of solutions that are working really, really well. And that's I love that it's not just sort of whine about the problem. It's here's some solutions.
Yes.
And then Fentanyl Death Incorporated, you can see that right now on salemnow.com, and that's a computer-based sort of phone application. We'll be in theaters in March and April. Select theaters around the country, and then we'll be national streaming May 6th with that, and that's Fentanyl Death Incorporated. Same deal. We got a history of how did we get here, what is our problems, and what are our solutions.
Yeah, and I know for the No Address documentary, we've already had several private screenings here in Pittsburgh, and the response has been great. It's led to great conversations. We held one for local community leaders, and so we're really hoping that helps spark a lot of action execution in our city. So thank you for the work that you do, and I'll just leave this open-ended. You have a bunch of leaders listening. Anything else you want to leave us with on any subject today?
If you keep doing it the same way, you're going to keep getting the same results. And if you're in a city that is homelessness is doubling every 4 years, and your fentanyl addiction and death rate is skyrocketing, what you're doing is not working. Do not say, let's put more money down on stupid. And I know that sounds brutal, but we have people dying. We can't pussyfoot around this and try to, put lipstick on the pig. If you're in a place where your numbers are going up, and deaths are going up and homelessness is going up, what you're doing is not working. It's time to make a change. Look to the cities that have had real reductions, and they're treatment-based, they're recovery-based, they're requirement-based, and they measure the right outcomes. And this idea that you measure your outcomes on how much subsidy we give you, how quick we give it, or how we help you do drugs with taxpayer dollars just is mind-boggling to me. So the great thing is there are places that have made the turn, made the change. And in most of the cities who've been so successful, they stopped chasing federal dollars.
Wow. Well, thank you for the conversation. It's been fascinating. And more importantly, thank you for the work that you're doing and the lives that you're saving as a result of this. And I can't wait to see what you do in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. And most importantly, thank you for caring about the homelessness and fentanyl crisis. Really appreciate it.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Dr. Robert Marbut. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes below. I also want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Endosha Marketing Solutions. They are the producers of this podcast, and if your organization needs marketing expertise, I cannot recommend them enough. You can check out their work at endosha.com. That's ANDOCIA.com. And as always at Leader, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Mahatma Gandhi, who said this: "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." Well, that's going to wrap up today's episode. As always, leaders, remember this: don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. Until next time, we'll talk to you next episode.